Hey, welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. Obviously, for those of you viewing this, it's just me. There's no Kimberly today, and here's why. For the last 4 days, our daughter Shara, has been trying to have a baby and couldn't do it. So today, finally, after 4 days of no sleep, little Elijah Gregory Photius was born 6:03 this morning. I know these stats you don't care about. I think it was like 6 pounds something. So, but anyway, everybody's healthy and maybe they'll get some sleep now. So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and do this podcast by myself and kind of share with you something that I think all of us struggle with from time to time. And that's this whole concept of stress. You realize there's two kinds of stress. There's good stress and there's bad stress. We never think of stress as a good thing, but without stress, there probably would not be anything accomplished. I used to have on my desk, I used to have this plaque that said, if it weren't for the last minute, I'd get nothing done. There's something about a deadline that really causes us to produce. And, if you've been in school or if you've been, at work and you got a project that you got to get done, and maybe you kind of waited to the last minute or the last couple of days and you're just panicked and you're getting it done, that's stress, and that's good stress. So what I learned to do when I was in college is I would put the stress on myself by creating deadlines of my own, arbitrary deadlines. And throughout, like, for example, if I had a project or a paper that I had to do and it was assigned at the beginning of the semester and it wasn't due till the end of the semester, I would set some deadlines on a weekly basis of what I wanted to accomplish, the research, first outline, then the rough draft, and then the final. And usually I would finish those ahead of time because I created my own arbitrary stress. Stress is good, but also stress is bad. I'm reminded of this verse. It says this in James chapter 1, verse 2. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various kinds of trials. Well, think about that. Who wants trials in their life? Who wants difficulty? Who wants the kind of struggle in life that says you've got to do something, you got to do it now? Nobody likes that, but it goes on to say in the next verse in James 1:3, it says, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. The word steadfast is a word in the Greek. It's hupomeno. Hupo means under, and meno means to abide. The idea is that you learn through trials, through stress, you begin to learn to abide under that stress, abide under that activity. And we need that stress for us to grow. It goes on, verse 4, and let this hupomeno, or this steadfastness, or this abiding under, have its full effect, that you may be complete. That idea that completion or maturity or growth comes through conflict, through difficulty. So this is what we try to do. We try to avoid all of these things in our life. The trial is actually a test to prove us, to grow us, to increase the quality of our life, our effectiveness, our reach, our influence, and so forth. So really, stress in James chapter 1 is really a positive thing. And the irony of that is, without trials, we usually won't grow at all. We will just stay the same. We'll stay stagnant. And one of the things that is a kind of an unintended consequence to welfare system is that when you give away something for free, now let me say the good thing about welfare in government programs is when people are in dire straits and they really need a hand up, it's very important that they get that. In fact, Kimberly, before I met her, was a single mother. She had 5 children. She was working as hard as she could and was having a hard time making it. And the welfare system kind of stepped in and helped her get past food stamps, different benefits that were given by the government. But as soon as she no longer needed that, she went down to the welfare office and said, hey, I don't need this anymore. And they were shocked. They said, nobody ever does this. Nobody ever comes in here and says, I don't need this anymore. But the reality was she was making enough money to make it, not real well, but she made it on her own. The problem is when people become dependent on that kind of welfare, and they begin to develop a new lifestyle. It drains the very humanity out of them because their incentive for personal growth is gone. Why not just stay here and be on the government program? Well, so there's good about it and there's bad about it. But look, life does not improve unless we have trials. That's James' whole point. So what is stress and why is stress good and when is stress bad? That's what I want to talk about in this episode of our podcast. I was thinking of a good illustration for stress. And I remember this card that I received, and I'll try to do my best to do it. It was a card about stress, and it simply said on the front of the card, "Are you stressed?" And the difference being stressed and being stressed out was inside. And it basically has a picture of a guy looking at a toilet. And when he's looking at the toilet, it goes on to explain, you use the toilet, you flush the toilet, no stress, it's an everyday occurrence. Then you realize the water is not going down like you hoped it would, and it starts to rise. And the more it begins to rise, you realize, I need to get a plunger. You look around, there's no plunger. You look in the cabinet, there's no plunger. You run to the other bathroom, and you finally find a plunger. When you get back in there, the water had rised up even more, and you start plunging. The plunger doesn't work, and the water is still rising. It's coming up to the rim, and as it gets closer to the rim, you're plunging harder and harder, and you begin beginning to panic, and now you're stressed out. That's what stress is. I don't know why somebody gave me that. I don't think it was a birthday card, but whatever it was a great illustration of what it means to be stressed versus stressed out. So let me tell you about the two basic kinds of stress. The first one is what we'll call eustress. Eustress in psychology is good. That prefix eu means good. It's good stress. The word comes from the Greek prefix meaning good, and then to have that stress. The idea is that stress that is good stress is really manageable. Let me give you just a few characteristics of good stress, whether you're in school and you've got projects, or whether you're in a career and you've got projects on that career, or you have financial difficulties. You're going to have to manage that. Well, here are the characteristics of good stress or eustress. Stress that is manageable. That's the first most important. You can manage this thing. Now, whether you manage it or not will determine whether you go from stressed to stressed out. The second thing is it's controllable. You can control, not only manage, but you can control that stress. The third characteristic of good stress is stress within your personal emotional parameters. So for some people, getting an assignment can be very disturbing, and other people like, okay, I'll manage this. Like I learned to do in college, I learned to, work ahead. But I must admit, every time I had a final, I would stay up all night getting ready for that stupid final, and then I'd be so tired, I probably would have done better if I had planned it out a little bit more. But emotional parameters are, what can you tolerate in your life? What are the things that you can tolerate? The fourth and final characteristic of good stress is stress that produces motivation for action and optimum performance. See, when you're stressed, when you're not stressed, let me put it this way. When you're not stressed, you will usually underperform. You need that stress to perform at an optimum level. Let me give you an example. So years ago, I was a manager of a gas station, and the gas station was not doing well when I first took it over. And I decided I wanted this thing to really be profitable. And so what I did was I hired a master mechanic we had three mechanic bays, and they weren't being used when I came in. They were just basically selling oil and gas, nothing else. And we had a little grocery store, very small, kind of a convenience store, and we were making money there. But to really make money, I figured we needed to do something to get dollars coming in. And so I hired this master mechanic, and I couldn't afford to pay him. So what I did was I said, look, I'm going to put you on commission at a really generous commission that I was going to pay him, because he's going to make money, and it was on his labor, not the parts, but on the labor. So what we did was we started selling oil changes at just our cost. And he realized this way people come in, and if you see other things, they need tires, they need more than just an oil change, they need something else done on their car. And I told him, I said, I don't want you ripping off anybody. I don't want you fabricating anything. We've got to be an honest business. And he started evaluating that, and we started making money like crazy. This is back in the 1970s, before many of you were born. But anyway, I remember one day I was looking through the window, and this guy was a pretty calm guy, but he's acting really erratic. And I went out and I said, hey, what's going on? He said, I can't find my torque wrench. Would you help me find it? And I said, okay, what's a torque wrench? And he said, well, he's trying to describe it to me. But anyway, we found the torque wrench, and he said, let me show you how it works. So in auto mechanics, obviously on an engine, you have a lot of vibration. And when you have a lot of vibration, bolts that are used to hold that engine together have enough stress on that bolt to make it really seat on that engine. And if it doesn't, it will rattle loose. But then, of course, if you put too much pressure on that wrench, you'll break that bolt. So where is that perfect place? Well, what happened was the engineers design the exact stress that is needed for that bolt to be tight enough, but not too tight. If it's too tight, again, it will break. If it's too loose, even though it may feel tight, it will eventually rattle loose and won't hold that engine together. So the torque wrench shows exactly how many pounds per square inch that go on that bolt head to tighten it down to get it to seat properly. Well, think about stress as it relates to that bolt. You're the bolt, and you need enough stress to really make your life optimal and hold your life together. Without that, you will rattle loose. With too much, you will break. So again, stress can be positive or stress can be negative. A word of warning, everyone is different, and everyone can handle, as I said, you need this emotional, you need to consider your emotional parameters. Everybody deals with stress differently. As a teacher, formerly a professor, I realized if I had all of the students under the same amount of stress, some would fail and some would succeed. That's just the way it is. Some people can't handle that stress. In life, when stress becomes too great, we call it de-stress. That's that point at breaking, that breaking point. So what does distress look like? Distress is when you've gone too far and you're over and out of control. So here are the characteristics of distress. The first one is stress that causes us to go over the top by loss of control. So when we can't manage it, it's overwhelming to us. That's the second thing. It's just so overwhelming, we actually stop functioning. We're in a state of shock, and we don't know what to do. So what a lot of people do when they have too much stress is they turn to all kinds of different things like alcohol or substance abuse, smoking. Maybe they divert by doing something else. They feel stress on this project, so they go run. And that's okay if you come back to the project. But what a lot of people do is they go overboard and they no longer can manage this. So they're out of control, they're overwhelmed, and they're stunned into unproductivity. So, how do we manage all of this? The stress may cause us to be irritable. I know I have a tendency to get irritable when I am stressed out. My wife knows really well, and probably my kids do too, that when I have stress in my life, I become irritable. I become short. I become withdrawn, sometimes anger, anxiety, even depression, fatigue, and tension headaches and stomach aches and even hypertension, ulcers, heart conditions, and all kinds of other problems. In fact, there are some scientists that believe that stress is one of the major causes of cancer because our body begins to deal with that psychological stress and it causes a reaction in our body. And, most causes of cancer are toxins that we take in, we're exposed to, or, a lack of water when we're dehydrated. But stress is right up there in a cause of cancer. So it's important to deal with stress and to learn what the triggers are. So let's think about some triggers. So one of the biggest triggers for adults is financial pressure. And it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what your income is or what your assets are. People can be stressed out at different levels of economic status. So people that are very rich are trying to hang on to their wealth. People that have beautiful homes are trying to hang on to their beautiful home. People that are retired are trying to make sure they have enough money to last through their lifetime. This is a major cause of stress. And I'll be honest with you, most of that is due to our unwillingness to be grateful for what we have. And if we have to even downsize what we have. And there's been a whole movement, especially about 10 years ago, there was this big movement to minimalize our lifestyle. And people would live in smaller homes. People would live with less things. They would have less toys. And the less of those things you have, probably the less stress you're going to have. So when we have leftover assets, we feel less stress. So the point being that it's very important for us to manage our money well, to be good stewards with what we have and not spend more than what we have. Relationship, second, and probably one of the biggest ones. So for example, when you get married, that's stressful. If you go through a divorce, that's stressful. If you have disagreements in a really deep, meaningful relationship, that is stressful. The fear of rejection by that person is stressful. That's why it's important in a relationship to constantly work on good communication and work on encouraging each other. Work can be very stressful. Schooling can be stressful. Training can be stressful. Health problems can be stressful. These are all triggers in our life that create stress. For example, if you're told you have cancer, that's going to create psychological stress. Now, it may be that cancer is not life-threatening, but when you hear that word cancer, immediately your mind goes to your own mortality. But the reality is that we oftentimes get ahead of the diagnosis, whether it's a financial diagnosis, a relationship diagnosis, a health issue diagnosis. We get ahead of where we are today. That's why God encourages us to live in this moment. Today is enough. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough worries. Jesus said has enough worries of its own. So if you want to avoid stress, these triggers are dismantled by being in the moment. God will give you the grace to deal with those stresses in our lives. I was thinking about one of the major things as a pastor. I've watched a lot of pastors, I've probably done it myself, maybe unknowingly, is creating what I call religious stress. Religious stress, the experts at this were the religious elite during the days of Jesus. These religious elites were Pharisees. And these Pharisees, Jesus confronted them and said, hey, the problem is you're giving people rules that you can't even bear yourself. You're not even willing to do these yourself, but you're telling people they have to pray in a certain way, they have to live in a certain way, they have to dress a certain way. Those are what I call religious stress. We sometimes call them legalism. But the reality is when we put stress on people like this, it is really dangerous to them, not only psychologically, but spiritually. But I think of what Jesus said to these people that were stressed out in the day of the Pharisees. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, I love this little short passage. Jesus said, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. I love, that's kind of a Bible term. Heavy laden is a Bible term for stressed out. And these people were religiously stressed out. The responsibilities of religious rigor was so great that they wanted relief. Think about what we do when we go into a new community of believers. What we have a tendency to do is we go, okay, what are the rules here? Every church culture has their own rules. And so are you living by those rules? And are you living up to those, quote, religious standards? It's very important to understand that the Word of God is our guide, not the church. Now, the church, I believe in the church, and I believe it's important to go to church. And yet, one of the reasons we drive people out of church is because we put the rigors of religious stress on them. Jesus said, if you're laboring and you're heavy laden and you're overwhelmed, he said, I will give you rest. Come to me and I will give you rest. That's a pretty awesome promise. Come to Jesus and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. That yoke is the idea that you have two beasts of burdens. Let's say a couple of ox. So you're the ox here. And you are yoked with another ox. In this case, Jesus said, take my yoke, you will yoke with me, and you will learn from me. This is what happens with a couple of beasts of burden. You have, let's say, one that's stronger than the other, and that's always the case. The fact of the matter is the stronger one cannot go faster than the slower one. The slower one maybe will improve a little bit, but there has to be that consistent growth. And what Jesus is saying, when you come to me, I'm going to be patient with you. He says this, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. There is a yoke and there is a burden, but there's rest in this because the pace is set by Jesus. Not for everybody at the same speed. Jesus is taking you at your speed. Think about that. That's the Christ that we have. And I think our churches would be better if we would allow people to grow at their own speed. Triggers for stress. You go into a church and you realize, I'm not at the level of these people. And so you feel this religious stress driving you. Jesus says, I don't want you to worry about that. I want you to yoke up with me. I will take care of you. I will give you rest. Yes, there's a burden involved. And yes, I will try you. And yes, I will improve your life. But in the process, you'll be able to rest. Isn't that a great concept? I think that one of the biggest problems I've had in my life is not trusting Christ with the speed he wanted me to grow. I remember as a young man, I got married very young as a teenager and then, had children right away. And here I was a father. I was as a young man, and I was also a pastor in my early 20s. So I have all this stress. People would come to me for counsel when I'm in my early 20s and they're in their 50s and I'm supposed to counsel them. Well, I barely know how to run my own life. In fact, I didn't know how to run my own life. But the reality was I was called upon. And I remember talking to one of my mentors at the time, an older guy in our church. He was probably in his late 60s. And I used to go to him and said, this is what's going on. And he goes, you know what? You're trying to do too much. You're trying to be too much. There are some people that you can't handle. Why don't you share this? And I said, what do you mean? He said, why don't you come up with a strategy to have older men and older women, kind of like the Bible teaches, to handle these? So I started a small group network, and we chose out about 10 men and women, couples, to lead small groups. And what happened was we began to see those men and women were mentoring the men and women in their groups, and the amount of counsel that I was doing was greatly reduced. But even better than that, the quality of life of people in our congregation improved, because they had people that knew them, people that were qualified to lead them, and it took the stress off of me. And certainly, Jesus is this way. He gives us these ways of dealing with it. One of the great things in our church, East Lake Church in Chula Vista, California, and we have a network of, I think it's 10 churches now, and I'm up in La Jolla at Torrey Pines Church, and I've watched all of the pastors, especially under the leader of Pastor James, develop their small group network, and people's lives are being touched at an incredible level by individuals. Jesus wants to take us at our own speed. And I love this. One of my favorite verses, which seems a little ethereal and obscure, says this, Psalm 55:22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. Think about that. Cast your burden upon the Lord. Well, that seems like, how am I going to do that? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to take this burden. You're going to say, God, I can't carry this. I'm going to put it on you. Can you carry this burden? Remember what he said, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Every time you feel stressed out, begin to look at the Lord and say, Lord, I can't handle this marriage problem. I can't handle this financial problem. And I will manage what I can, but I need the stress that's making me get ahead of the problem. I'm asking you to take that from me. So the good stress is what tightens that bolt down, as I said earlier, and it makes you at an optimum level. We need enough stress to produce well. We need to avoid too much stress or we will break. Remember, God is in the business of providing rest for you. So come to him, trust him, and he will give you rest. Thanks for listening to Hope Rescue Podcast. Pray for our family. We got this new baby, number 7 grandchild, and we got number 8 on the way coming this summer. So we're really excited about that. Thanks for listening to Hope Rescue Podcast. We'll see you next week.